Joining us today on our wonderful panel, we have Trang Nguyen at the end there, who is the Southeast Asia lead for Climateworks Centre at Monash University here in Melbourne. She's also a non-executive director for the non-profit Asian Australians for Climate Solutions, which is aimed at increasing climate change awareness and engagement among Asian Australian communities. We also have Sophia Hamblin Wang, who is the co-founder and CEO of MCi Carbon, which transforms carbon dioxide emissions into building materials and other industrial products. She's an expert on circular economies and is recognised as a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. And last but certainly not least, we also have Anh Mai, who is the Executive Director of Offshore Wind Energy Victoria for the state government, which works to drive development of offshore wind in the state. Before this position, she was the Acting Deputy Secretary of the Energy Group and has also been the Director of Vic Grid. So all that said, I'm sure that you would all much rather hear from the panel from themselves. So to start off our discussion today, I'm hoping that each of you might be able to tell us all a little bit about your work and how it is involved in the regional energy transition here in the Indo-Pacific. Trang, maybe you could start off?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and great to see a lot of familiar faces in the room as well. So I work for Climateworks and I lead the Southeast Asia team. Climateworks is an independent non-profit organization under Monash University with an aim to accelerate decarbonization at scale. And my role is to lead policy and engagement for Climateworks with Southeast Asian countries.
Great. Sophia?
So I've just actually stepped off the plane from New York, so I apologise if I'm a little bit frazzled.
No worries.
And I just wanted to pay my respects to the Indigenous, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. And yeah, the work that I do, and the reason that I was in New York and Tokyo actually before that is I'm developing with a team of 50 engineers technology that transforms emissions into usable and valuable materials. So really developing the business models behind climate change solutions. We've been growing in Australia for the last 11 years and building our technology in Newcastle, which is designed to transform, at the moment, emissions from the chemicals industry, steel, cement, and all of the hard-to-abate sectors. Growing technology in Australia that is broadly in the carbon capture and utilisation sector, or carbon dioxide removal and durable storage and transformation of CO2 is super interesting because we have so much abundant resources and skills within the bulk materials handling industry, and basically all of our staff have come from the traditional fossil industries or the carbon industries of the past and are now working in the carbon industry of the future, which is what we're trying to create ourselves. Now, in Australia, we have a lot of support from our federal government, around $40 million worth of grant funding in order to get to where we are today. But we're building a business model that will be sustainable and super profitable by the year 2030. Which means that raising money from global investors has been actually really difficult in a time when it's hard for any ventures to raise capital. So if you have a 6-year return on investment window, it's actually really difficult. So we've been super successful getting grant funding from Australian federal government and the New South Wales government, but now it's time for us to turn our attention elsewhere. And we actually took investment from an engineering, a European industrial company called RHI Magnesita, and we will build our first commercial plant in Europe, in Austria, and that will come online in 2027, 2028. That plant will lock away 50,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum and be a profitable business model. That means that we need to be consistently engaging with the European Commission and making sure that the rules behind the ETS in Europe are favourable to technologies like ours, or at minimum not exclusive to technologies like ours. We also have painted Japan and the US as other key areas. Now, apologies if this is a bit long.
No,
I promise.
not at
I'm
all.
going somewhere.
Very, very interesting stuff. I might just have to pass it over,
sure.
though, in the interest of time. Alan, if you might be able to give us a bit of an overview of what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I head up an organisation in the Victorian Government called OWEV, which is Offshore Wind Energy Victoria. We are establishing the regulatory frameworks and the auction design to procure Australia's first offshore wind energy, likely off the coast of Gippsland, which has 12 projects now licensed by the Commonwealth Government to develop offshore wind. Together, those 12 projects, if all developed, can provide about 25 gigawatts of energy, which is 5 times the size of Victoria's coal fleet right now. So it's a huge endeavour, and the long lead time for offshore wind is about 10 to 15 years. So we got started a few years ago, and it requires not just the construction of offshore wind generation, but the construction of a port that can then enable offshore wind to be assembled, and the construction of transmission lines which will connect the offshore wind to our grid. So it's a huge endeavour which Victoria's been leading the country in for some time.
Great. Very, very diverse panel here. We've got government, we've got private industry, we've got non-profit. And thank you for giving us that overview, guys. I'm hoping that to kick off our discussion, we might be able to talk a little bit about regional collaboration more broadly. So Trang, I might start off with you here. I'm wondering what you see as being the key opportunities for collaboration between Southeast Asia and Australia to achieve net zero.
Yeah, sure. I'm a Southeast Asian nationality. I'm a Vietnamese. I just moved to Melbourne for 3 years now. And within the last 3 years, I have seen a lot of great progress in terms of collaboration between Australia and Southeast Asia in terms of net zero emission reduction and decarbonization, which is a great thing to see for someone working on climate change like myself. And there certainly are a lot of opportunities. Australia and Southeast Asia have shared challenges. For example, very fossil fuel-based economy that Sophia alluded to a little bit. So there's a lot of, first of all, opportunity to share policy exchanges from areas including like things like energy system planning or like just energy transition. We were like two months ago, we took a delegation of practitioner leaders from Indonesia and Vietnam to La Trobe Valley, for example, to see a lot of good example of the economic and regional transition and what our coal phase out look like for the region. So there's a lot of synergy in terms of sharing that policy experience between Australia and South Asia. The second thing is business to business exchange. There's a lot of opportunities in the low carbon economy world that can sort of be opened up to Australian business, and I think Southeast Asia is a really good market for Australian business to start engaging and expand the opportunities. Last month, we together with Climateworks, together with AsiaLink, took a delegation of around 50 businesses come to Vietnam for a summit of around 200 companies. And we find that there are a lot of synergies between Australia and the region in terms of understanding more about the opportunities in both countries on energy transition. And there are a lot of synergy in offshore wind sectors, for example, solar development, low carbon technology, manufacturing, and investing in sustainable financing projects. So those are the key sectors that really potential, and it requires a lot of also support from non-profit organizations like, for example, AsiaLink or Asia Society in terms of bringing those, connecting the bridges, and also government working alongside business to sort of introduce the opportunity to business as well. And I think very quickly on the last one is in terms of the skill sectors, education and skills is very important. There will be 5.5 million new jobs new green jobs created in the region from now until 2050. And Australian education sector has always been very strong in terms of attracting students and scholars from Southeast Asia. So there is a really strong opportunity for Australian sector to transform ourselves and also to attract more and to support the region in terms of building that skill and knowledge for the energy transition. I'm going to pause there. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually want to pick up on a point that you made there. When you were speaking about the opportunities for collaboration, you actually specifically mentioned offshore wind, which is obviously what our Anh specialises in. So Anh, I might throw this next question to you. I'm wondering if you might be able to talk us through the unique opportunity that we have here in Australia. So we have access to vast renewable resources here, and we're also on the doorstep of Asia as their energy demands continue to grow. How is this a unique opportunity, and are we making the best of that opportunity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as Trang's pointed out, we already have a very unique value proposition in our education system, in our ability to train people up and get skills. The energy transition can't happen unless we train up people. So I think that's one comparative advantage that I think we really need to look to exploit. The other is the offshore wind market in particular is a nascent market in the APAC region. And, you know, over the past year or so I've been in this role, I've hosted countless delegations from Asia looking to collaborate with Victoria and Australia on how we drive the supply chain development for our region. Supply chain is the biggest challenge to the energy transition and workers. And we know that, you know, we're playing catch up with the States, and under their IRA, they've had so much investment. And we definitely are playing catch up with Europe, at least in offshore wind, where they have put some huge targets in place, and they are financing it, and they've run countless auctions. So I think a really great opportunity here is to amplify the APAC region and the Southeast Asian region voice, and say we are a nascent market, but we are going to mature quickly. The Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, Australia, we are all looking to do offshore wind, and we need to really quickly develop up the supply chain to come and meet our needs. When you gather up all the kind of growth that is about to happen, the firms, the OEMs and the manufacturers and the suppliers, they need to look at growth as well, not just us. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for Australia to work with our colleagues across the region to build the supply chain, to get agreement on standards, which will also accelerate the development of products and componentry to come into our market, so we can decarbonise our energy sector as quickly as possible. We know that those runs, they need to get on the board quickly, and there is an urgency not just behind renewable energy development, but I think getting cooperation across the region that we're all focused on the same thing and they're all driving towards the same objective. So I think that the recent ASEAN talks help to facilitate and identify that, but I think we can invest much more in that.
And Sophia, I'm sure that you're probably coming at this from a slightly different angle because you're the only one of our panellists today that works in the private sector, currently at least. I'm wondering, with this in mind, might you be able to talk us through some of the promising technological innovations that you see Australia could adopt from the region or vice versa?
Absolutely. I work broadly in the carbon capture and utilisation sector, and I actually get quite a lot of insights into other technologies that are being developed. But obviously, my background and what I value is in technologies that stop emissions from going into the atmosphere, or technologies that suck the CO2 out and actually move the dial on whether we get to net zero by 2050, whether we save the Great Barrier Reef by the year 2050, whether we can keep our warming below 1.5 degrees. So I've always got that as the main outcome that I look towards. There are some great innovations that are happening within hydrogen and within carbon dioxide removal, as I mentioned. But just to link in with what you were saying, like we look at all of these, all of the massive amounts of renewables that are required to deploy, but a lot of technologies that are trying to decarbonise the atmosphere also rely quite significantly on massive amounts of renewables, and so we really need like a systems approach in order to get 300% the amount of renewables that we already have. What I will say is that we, from the private sector perspective, we need governments to set the North Star, to coordinate and collaborate in order for us to crowd in investment. There's currently a market failure, which means that technologies that have a business model behind them, they're not getting investment within from the private sector, at least not enough. That's why my company, we raised more than $10 million last year from Japanese banks and Japanese conglomerates. One of the reasons is because the Japanese government committed to net zero by 2050 before Australia did. They legislated that target. They set forth very clear plans and told the private sector, get on board, we need to do this. And their private sector started to invest not only in Japan and in the region, but also into Australian companies. And one would assume that the same thing will happen in Australia, but it's actually, I would say, slower than we're seeing in our neighbours.
That actually very, very nicely leads into what I wanted to talk about next, which is policy and economy side of this transition. So, you mentioned that maybe government needs to step in a little bit more because the market just isn't quite investing as it needs to be yet. And I might throw this one to you. As we know, many consider the Victorian government to be kind of a leader in terms of the energy transition. What are the potential economic benefits that you see as a result of this for Victoria specifically?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious thing is the jobs. So we have a community down in Gippsland and the Trobe Valley that has for 100 years been the power source of our state. And we were living off that coal, that cheap coal, for a century, and we have been. We continue to enjoy energy from that coal. That community, which prides itself on providing energy to the entire state, and the NEM, which is the Eastern Seaboard, they are looking for opportunities to transition towards a different future. They still want to do energy, and it's in generations of families. So we're trying to create a whole new sector that can not only continue to power the state, but also to provide those opportunities and those jobs, and to do it in a way that is different to this sort of traditional bloke goes to power plant, bloke works in power plant, bloke retires. This is an opportunity for women, for traditional owners, for all parts of the community to be part of the energy transition and then enjoy, not just at the peak of the jobs we're seeing, which are about, we estimate up to 4,000 new jobs in the mid-2030s, but the ongoing jobs when these wind farms will be operational, that's about 1,500 jobs ongoing, and they're good jobs. They're highly trained, highly technical, highly valuable jobs where people feel like they're having an impact. So there's the jobs, but then from that, there is actually a really important, I think, economic opportunity for Victoria to safeguard its economy. I think, back when, decades ago when I started work, it was really clearly understood that energy is a key input into economic activity. And the cost of living is showing energy, and the cost of energy hurts or can hurt everyone if it's not managed well. And then the reality of a world where we don't have sufficient energy, and what we in the sector call load curtailment, which is when customers are dropped off supply, that is a future we are working so hard to avoid. But if there is a risk that we don't have sufficient energy for our state, our economy suffers. And then it's not just about industry, it is about our entire economic system. It's about payments to governments, it's about people being able to rely on services to access things that they need to do their work. So the energy system is intrinsically linked to our economy, And I think working to safeguard the reliability of our energy sources and decarbonise them at the same time is just so critical that we can't waste time on things that are not viable and not deliverable. So I might stop there.
Thank you very much. Very interesting thoughts there, ladies. Now, in the interest of time, I might open up this discussion to the floor for questions now. So do we have any questions for our panellists? We've got one here.
Thank you, and thanks to the panel for your insights this afternoon. I'm interested in the skills that are needed moving forward. I think we've touched a little bit on the retraining of people who've previously worked in other sectors and the need going forward. What skills do you think are most in need, and collectively across the economy and the region, how do you think we can work together to bridge that gap, particularly amongst the cohort that we have here today?
I can answer a little bit on that. Yeah, so there's different skills element on that, reskilling, new skilling. And then there's also a lot of modeling at the moment. Actually, just point out the figures for engineering and maintenance job, which is very energy transition focused. Actually, the whole energy transition requires a sort of very holistic approach on skill transition across different sectors. Like if I work I'm a finance investor, for example, now I need to understand a lot more about what does it mean for sustainable financing and what a sustainable portfolio would look like. Or if I am an economist, I would need to understand a little bit how to have a carbon budget to be included in my economic modeling in the future. So skilling, to me, is not just really about engineering jobs. It's really about like embedding green elements in all the different parts of the curriculum at different level, not just universities, but also TVET plays a significant role in the energy transition as well, vocational training, and all different layers of the skills. So I think that it needs to require a holistic approach in terms of design, the education and vocational training system. And I think that's where Australia has a role to play to transform our own education sector, but also like to help the region in that sense.
Maybe I can talk just a little bit in detail about our sector. So we have, but the majority of our current staff are chemical engineers, process engineers and geologists, and we're currently hiring all of our plant operators and maintenance people and all of the other like electrical engineers and all of that. We also will require like logistics experts and bulk materials handling experts and the whole logistics frame, so kind of similar to a cement plant, how they have to quarry the mineral and then take it to the facility and then also transport it to the end market. So it's very similar to that. The federal government of Australia, it has a new body called the Net Zero Economy Authority, and one of their key focuses, they're tasked with trying to solve or help the upskilling challenge and ensuring that we're engaging with both the unions and also training bodies so that we're creating the net zero economy of the future and we don't result in gaps. What I see from America is that the IRA money that has been massively deployed, they all have a whole lens, like 1/5 of the applications are talking about what skills do you need, how many jobs will this create, and you win the funding based upon these kinds of clear thinking in the direction of this. So I think Australia is also pretty good in this respect, but definitely we have that Net Zero Economy Authority has to deliver some work, and I think that is close. Yeah.
I might add that Victoria is going to release later this year the Victorian Energy Jobs Plan, and it identifies all the different categories of skills that we need, and there's some big gaps, particularly in the STEM area, but also across the different phases of renewable energy project development. In the sort of development phase, you need a lot of environmental skills, and we're short of those. In offshore wind, towards the construction phase, we need a lot of marine skills. And Australia has a rich history of marine services, but we don't have nearly enough people to do that work. And then once sort of the big plant is operational, you need people who are good with their hands. And I've asked the Danish about this, and they said, we can train anyone, but they need to be problem solvers and good with their hands. Sometimes they hang off these things 300 metres in the sky, so they can't be afraid of heights. But I mean, a lot of them have lifts that go up and down. Probably the ones we'll build will have lifts inside them. But you need practical people. And so you kind of need to invest in all the sectors, exactly as Trang said, because we lack commercial people, we lack transactional people, we lack the STEM, and we certainly don't have any of the people that do offshore wind yet. We'll need to train them up. There's huge kind of swathes of skills that we need to develop up really quickly.
And I guess I'll add two more things to that. Like we need people who can communicate around the measurement, reporting and validation of the technologies. And so that's not only engineers, that's like, you know, in the business world as well. And then community consultation, right? We need to work on the social license of all of the technologies that we want to build, because at the end of the day, if the community isn't on board, then you've really got nothing. So we need people who are good with people who are listening, good at listening and bringing that feedback back to the company, because it's not just a one-way street, it's two ways, and they're really important skills that I think we are not properly upskilling in currently.
Great. Do we have any more audience questions? Oh, we've got a few. Over here, there's one. Do you want to do a swap? You can take this one if you want. Okay.
Hello. Hi. My name is Connor Wright. I'm the Australian Y20 delegate for climate change. I'm just wondering, in Australia and around Southeast Asia, there's some communities that are especially vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And ongoing adaptation methods might leave these communities behind, especially when they're not economically viable or profitable. And I'm wondering what governments and private industry can do to sort of solve this issue.
Who wants to take that one first?
That's a really tough question. Look, there are sectors in government that think about adaptation in adapting or coping with climate change. In the way that communities expect benefits from investments, this is a form of consideration that I think particularly the companies that are looking to embed their business in the community, they should think about how they can also benefit that community and not just produce a revenue stream.
I'm from far north Queensland, so I grew up on the Great Barrier Reef, and that's also not so far from the Torres Strait Islands, who are some of those communities that are feeling the direct impacts of climate change right now. So I think our government does have a special responsibility to help those early communities that are feeling the effects of climate change. But let's be clear, we are all experiencing the effects of climate change already. We all lived through the bushfires of 2020. That kind of summer will be a regular occurrence in a 2-degree world. Our Australian government needs to be thinking very actively on how to further support adaptation in those communities. I definitely don't have the answer, but I do know that the Australian government is very actively trying to win the COP26 bid, the COP31 bid in 2026. And that will mean that it's Australia and the Pacific hosting the COP, which is the largest event that a nation can host apart from the Olympics. So it's not a small thing. If we are to win the bid, which is probably, more than a 50% likelihood, it's only down to 2 countries now. All eyes will be on Australia on how we're helping not only our own communities but also our Pacific neighbours through this really important decade.
Yeah, so very quickly on that, because I'm not really adaptation expert, because Climateworks is very decarbonisation focused, but I do know that the financing for adaptation is very important, and you are right to point out that it's very hard to design a market mechanism for adaptation solutions. And then therefore government does play an important role. I do see government plays a very important role in terms of sort of supporting the innovation, like in terms of research and innovation, so that like having a solution for adaptation. The second thing that I see with another organization that I'm part of, which is the Asian Australian for Climate Actions, is that capacity building for the community. It's very important to equip them with the knowledge for adaptation. But also, just one last thing I really want to say, because I work with Southeast Asian countries, and a lot of them always highlight the need for adaptation. And I think it's not either or, like all the solution for net zero solution for today actually help to reduce the need for adaptation in the future. So yeah, that's some of my thoughts.
Good point.
I don't think that we have any time for further questions, unfortunately, but I might just throw one quick question to you guys. Rapid fire answer, just one line each. If you could change one Australian policy on energy transition, what would it be? Who wants to take
Existing
that
or from
one?
the past?
Either. Interpret it as you will.
I can start first. I can only comment on the Australia international policy, because that's where I'm most familiar with. I guess at the moment, a lot of Australian policy towards the region has been see a lot of positive shifts in terms of on climate change and collaboration. But I think there should be a little bit more integrated approach between policy, trade support. So for example, at the moment, Australian send a lot of delegation to Southeast Asia supporting the green economy business, for example. But to unlock those opportunities require a lot of policy discussion between Australia and the Southeast Asian government. So that needs to be a more structured approach working alongside between policy and trade support. That's where we can bring more business and make more Australian companies success in the green economy war with Southeast Asian counterparts.
I think longer than a few lines, but they were very good lines, so I'll let it pass. Sophia?
There's currently a disconnect between the true cost of carbon, the social cost of carbon, and the price of carbon in our markets, or with whatever mechanism the government chooses. So if I were to have one change, it would be to not have a cap on the price of carbon and have the price on carbon or the mechanism behind carbon to be closer to the social cost and the true cost that is borne on our future generations.
Great. And any final thoughts on?
Similar to that, I would rewind time and go back to when the ETS was repealed and put it back, because we wouldn't be 15 years behind.
Great note to end
mine,
our
though that wasn't a
conversation
Victorian
on today.
government position.
Okay, on that note, I would like to say a huge thanks to our panellists today and hand it back over to Asta. Thank you very much.